When the Mongols swept through Russia in 1238, no city dared to resist, except one. A small fortress town, barely a dot on the map, Kozelsk. What happened there stunned the Mongol war machine. For 7 brutal weeks, this city fought back fiercely, turning the siege into a bloodbath. The Mongols would later call it the City of Evil. But why? What did the people of Kozelsk do that shook even the greatest conquerors in history? And why did Batu Khan's army, known for ruthless efficiency, spend nearly 2 months trying to break this fortress, despite richer prizes like Smolensk lying just days away? The truth is worse than we were told. Before we begin, take a moment to subscribe and join us. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Now let's get started. For a time, Genghis Khan's troops left Russes alone, their eyes fixed elsewhere on the vast Eurasian steppes. But in 1237, the relentless tide shifted. Batu Khan, grandson of the great conqueror, turned westward with an army assembled from the far corners of the Mongol Empire. By the year's end, this force had crushed the Volga Bulgars, scattered the Alans and Polovtsians, and subdued several Finno-Ugric tribes whose lands stretched across the northern forests. The numbers remain debated. Medieval chronicles speak of anywhere between 100,000 and 600,000 warriors, a staggering force by any measure. Yet modern historians, mindful of the era's logistical limits, often suggest more conservative estimates. Regardless, it was a massive host, gathering its strength through the bitter winter of 1237 to 1238, poised to bring the Mongol war machine back to the doorsteps of the Russian principalities. During the harsh winter campaign of 1237 to 1238, Batu Khan's Mongol forces struck deep into the heart of Rus', targeting the principalities of Ryazan and Vladimir Suzdal. Their armies descended upon Rus' cities with overwhelming speed and force. Ryazan was the first to fall, enduring a siege that ended in devastation. By the end of 1240, most of the Rus' principalities had either been destroyed or forced into submission, with Vladimir, the capital of northeastern Rus, taken after relentless assaults. Meanwhile, the secondary forces under Baroldai ravaged the Volga region and dealt a crushing defeat to the army of Yuri Vsevolodovich of Vladimir at Sit. Tragically, the entire family of Prince Yuri perished in the fire that followed. Prince Yuri and his retinue had been preparing to repel the Mongol onslaught, confident they could defeat the invaders in battle. This confidence stemmed from the Russian army's repeated victories over the Polovtsians, and Yuri believed the Mongols to be less skilled warriors. He gathered the best forces of his principality. However, Yuri carelessly scattered his troops across different villages and failed to establish adequate patrols. The Mongols exploited this, defeating his army in detail, one by one. The remnants fled in disarray, pursued relentlessly for 70 kilometers by the Mongol forces. The head of Prince Yuri was taken as a grisly trophy and presented to Khan Batu. The Mongols had expected easy victories. Torzhok fell in just 2 weeks, Ryazan in 6 days, Vladimir in 4. But to assume the conquest was swift and effortless would be a grave mistake. For all their fearsome reputation, the Mongols met with unexpected resistance. Many cities fought to the last man, turning the campaign into a prolonged bloodbath. In pitched battles, the Mongols slaughtered Rus' defenders, but not without paying a price themselves. At Kolomna, the Mongol Prince Kulgan, one of Genghis Khan's sons by a secondary wife, was killed in combat. Such a blow demanded severe retribution. Moscow, the closest major city, was razed on January 15, 1238, in a fiery warning. Despite some modern attempts to downplay or deny the invasion, the Mongol conquest is well documented across a variety of sources: Russian chronicles, Polish and German accounts, even French records. The Pope and England's King Henry III were aware of the Mongol threat sweeping westward. Archaeological discoveries provide further proof. In Ryazan, for example, skeletal remains show victims killed by blows from behind, a grim indication of how prisoners were treated. The widespread presence of distinctive triangular Mongol arrowheads further confirms the campaign's brutal reality, as historian Vladimir Kuchkin explains. When the city finally fell on March 5, 1238, it had cost the Mongols more time than they'd expected. Now the Mongols set their sights on an even greater prize: Novgorod. However, Novgorod never burned. They pressed on, hacking their way roughly 100 kilometers deeper into the northern forests. The mud grew thick. The roads, if they could be called that, vanished into tangled woods. Feed for horses grew scarce, and the army, worn down from months of brutal fighting and long marches, began to show cracks. Up to a place referred to in the chronicles as the Ignach Cross, the advance stopped. Several factors likely contributed to this decision. Perhaps the generals feared losing more men. Perhaps the prize wasn't worth the cost. Perhaps it was simply time to rest, count the spoils, and prepare for the next war. Whatever the reason, the Mongol tide receded. They turned south, away from Novgorod, toward the open steppe. On the way back, the horde split in two. One wing, under Khadan and Buri, swept east through Ryazan's battered lands. The other, Batu's main force, pushed west, skirting through Dolgomost, roughly 30 kilometers just east of Smolensk, before curving through the upper rivers of Chernigov. Towns like Vyshtizh went up in smoke. But then, rather than pressing onward to the wealthier cities, the Mongols made a strange turn. Northeast, bypassing Bryansk and Karachev, away from the obvious prizes. Their new destination? A poor fortress town called Kozelsk on the Zhizdra River. Kozelsk was a small and relatively poor town, and its capture offered little strategic advantage at first glance. Yet, Batu Khan laid siege to it. Why? Because memories run long on the steppe. 15 years earlier, during the blood-soaked days of the Khalkha campaign, a prince of Kozelsk had helped kill the Mongol envoys, an unforgivable sin. Though that prince was long dead, the Mongols believed guilt passed through blood and soil. The people of Kozelsk would pay. Lev Gumilev once wrote, "The city of Kozelsk lay on their way, and the memory of Khalkha led them to its walls." The behavior of the steppe dwellers may seem unjustifiably cruel, but they followed their ideas just as we follow ours. But there was more. Though provincial in size, no more than 3,000 to 4,000 inhabitants, Kozelsk's position was critical. Kozelsk sat astride a vital artery of Rus, a road threading between the middle Dnieper and upper Volga. Whoever controlled Kozelsk controlled the crossroads of Eastern Europe. At the head of the Kozelsk defenders stood a boy, 12-year-old Prince Vasily Titik. He was the grandson of Mstislav Sviatoslavich of Chernigov, one of the princes slain at the Battle of Khalkha in 1223. The exact genealogy of young Vasily remains uncertain. His father is believed to have been Ivan Mstislavich, but what is clear is that Vasily inherited not just a noble name, but also the old hatred of the Mongols, and a fate written in fire and blood. Though Kozelsk was modest in size, it was better fortified than even the great cities of Kiev and Vladimir. Archaeological and paleogeographic evidence reveals that the town was well protected by nature itself. Rivers, swamps, hills, and deep ravines wrapped around the settlement like a shield. Earthen ramparts ringed the city, and wooden fortress walls rose atop them. It was no grand citadel, but it was a thorn in the side of the invader. Much has been written about the courage of Kozelsk's people, and rightly so. But it would be naive to think that Ryazan, Torzhok, Vladimir, or Moscow fought with any less desperation. What truly made Kozelsk so difficult to take was its geography. The old town lay like an island, surrounded on three sides by the deep, fast-moving waters of the Zhizdra River and the surrounding swamplands. This terrain robbed the Mongols of their favorite tactics, surrounding a city, isolating it, and crushing it with waves of horsemen and siege engines. By late March 1238, the Zhizdra had thawed and swollen with spring melt. The ice that had helped Mongols storm other cities had vanished. Batu Khan could only attack from a single direction, the unfortified northwestern side. Today, modern Kozelsk lies on the left bank of the Zhizdra River. But in the 13th century, the fortified town sat nestled between the Zhizdra and the winding Drugusna River. That small river loops tightly before joining the Zhizdra, forming a natural moat around the town's historical center, an elevated cape nearly encircled by water. Thanks to archaeological research in the 2010s, we now know the layout of that battlefield. The fortress itself, The detonets covered just 0.8 hectares. The entire fortified town, perched between rivers, spanned no more than 6 hectares. On the northeastern edge of the high cape sat the citadel, while the main town stretched across the loop of land carved by the Drugusna. In the spring of 1238, the army of Batu Khan arrived at the gates of Kozelsk. What they expected was routine, another terrified town, another swift capitulation. Batu, growing impatient, sent envoys to offer terms, peace in exchange for surrender. Capitulation would spare the town, they said. Lay down your arms, open the gates, and live. The alternative was clear: slaughter and fire. Inside the walls, the townspeople gathered for a council. They knew what the Mongols brought. They had seen the smoke rising from other cities. They understood the choice that faced them: slavery or death. There would be no reinforcements, no cavalry coming over the horizon. Kozelsk stood alone, but so too did their resolve. The townspeople looked to their young prince, Prince Vasily Titik, and made their choice. Our prince is but a child, yet we as true believers must die for him. Let our names be remembered with honor in this world, and may we receive the crown of immortality in the next. A few hundred defenders stood behind Kozelsk's wooden walls. Facing them, Batu's host of 200,000. And yet, they chose to fight. Most of Rus' men to face Batu would have been farmers with axes, not warriors with armor. More significantly, and with all the princes too busy feuding, trying to unify them was nearly impossible due to the deep divisions. Batu started the siege by lobbying stones with his catapults, but the land was all wrong, too hilly. The shots went wild, so he threw his men at the walls again and again, and every time they fell back, they left behind piles of their own dead. Several theories exist regarding the city's prolonged resistance. Some say the townsfolk used the freezing weather to their advantage, doused the ramparts in water and turned them to ice. Try scaling a frozen wall under arrow fire and you'll see what that buys you. Others say it had warmed up already, and the rivers swelled so much the Mongols couldn't find a way in. Not until a trader from a nearby village showed them a dry path through the swamps. By early May, the spring floods finally started to drain, and Kadan and Buri crossed the Zhizdra from the east. That closed the circle. But the rains had come too. The roads turned into rivers of mud. Even the Mongols, with all their speed and skill, couldn't move like they were used to. No help came from nearby Chernigov. Mikhail Vsevolodovich couldn't ride through the muck, and maybe he knew it was already too late. Kozelsk stood alone, ringed in on every side, and still the people held the line. Now, if you've come this far with me, I've got to warn you. This next part isn't easy to hear, but history isn't always pretty. Batu Khan, frustrated and bloodied, decided he'd try one last card to burn Kozelsk to the ground. Trouble was, his army had run dry. No sulfur left, no tar, no pitch or resin. They'd used it all up pounding other Russian towns into submission. So the Khan reached back into the old family playbook, something he'd heard about from the days of his grandfather, Genghis Khan himself. It started with smoke, big fires in the Mongol camps. At first, the defenders thought they were burning their own dead, and they were. But then the fires changed. No smoke, just flames. And then the truth hit. They weren't burning only their own anymore. They took the Russian prisoners, men they had planned to use as slaves, and slaughtered them. Chopped them up and boiled them in iron cauldrons right there in the open. They were after the fat. Human fat. Burns hot and slow, just like resin. They poured it into clay jars, collected from every farmhouse and village nearby. Soaked rags in it, tied those to arrows, and let fly. The rest they tossed over the walls. Sticky yellow stuff that clung to anything it hit. It was hell, pure and simple. An Italian friar by the name of Plano Carpini passed through Mongol lands 8 years later and heard the story firsthand. That kind of thing sticks in a man's mind. And if it shook a seasoned traveler like him, you can imagine what it must have done to the folks inside Kozelsk. The Mongols finally busted a hole through the wall with their siege machines and stormed the rampart. Fires lit up the night sky. It was chaos. Smoke, screams, hand-to-hand fighting. The Kozelsk defenders, with nothing left but knives and grit, cut into them with everything they had. One chronicle says they cut them down with goat knives. And you know what? It worked. The Mongols pulled back again. But time was running out. The spring floods had done what walls alone couldn't. They slowed the Mongols. The river valleys, swollen with meltwater, had turned into quagmires of sucking mud. The lowlands were useless, the ground too soft for movement. Cavalry couldn't maneuver, supply wagons bogged down. Arrows fell short in the wet winds. The mighty Mongol war machine, so fast and fluid across the steppes, found itself stuck, bottled up on the narrow ridges between the Zhizdra and the Drugusna rivers. And that's when the people of Kozelsk saw their opening. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. They knew the end was near. The walls were crumbling, their supplies were gone, but their spirit was not. So they made a decision. They'd go down swinging. The chronicles say they made a light. That's how the old scribes put it. But it wasn't a signal fire or a beacon. No, it was something far more final. They lit their homes, their stores, their own town. Fire curled through the streets as they kissed their children goodbye, shouldered what weapons they had left, spears, axes, broken blades, and opened the gates one last time. Then they charged. A roar like thunder rolled out of Kozelsk, a wall of smoke and flame behind them, death in front of them. And they struck the Mongol camp like a hammer from the sky. No one saw it coming. The Tatars, so used to inspiring fear, were stunned. Siege engines toppled, tents burned, horses scattered. In the chaos, thousands of Mongol warriors were cut down. Some accounts say 4,000 died in that final melee. Maybe more. For a moment, it looked like the impossible had happened. Kozelsk had pierced the heart of the Mongol horde. But it was a death charge. Not a single soul returned. Every man who left those burning gates died on that field. They say that in the 1800s, workers digging foundations near the outskirts of Kozelsk found a pile of 267 skulls, each one showing signs of death by blade. Folks say those were the men from that final charge, the final stand of Kozelsk's defenders, those who refused to fall back when the gates were breached, who charged headlong into the Mongol ranks, knowing they wouldn't live to see another sunrise. They died to deny Batu the pleasure of an easy conquest, deny him the myth of invincibility, and in the end, Kozelsk fell. 7 long weeks, 49 days of fire raining from the sky, of walls shaken by siege engines, of smoke curling from ruined homes, and screams echoing through the trees. For 7 weeks, a city that should have been forgotten in the dust of history stood like a stone in the river, breaking the current. That little town had done what bigger cities couldn't. But Kozelsk just wouldn't quit. When the gates finally fell and the streets were drenched in blood, Batu Khan was furious. Not victorious, furious. Kozelsk wasn't meant to be a battlefield. It was supposed to be a footnote, a minor stop on the way to greater prizes. But instead, it had slowed his army to a crawl. It had drained his strength, broken his timeline, cost him soldiers, cost him commanders, and, perhaps worst of all, it had wounded his pride. So he made an example of it. No one was spared. Not the old, not the infants, not even the prince, a boy barely into his teens who had stood among his people in those final days. The chronicles do not shy from the image. They say he was hacked to death and died soaked in his own blood. Not metaphorically, literally drowned in the crimson flood that covered the streets of Kozelsk. When the killing was over, the walls were not left to stand in quiet memory. Batu ordered them pulled down, stone by stone. The city was erased, annihilated. Kozelsk was wiped off the map, and yet its name lived on, in silence. Batu forbade his men from even speaking it. The pain, the fury, the humiliation of that place cut too deep. But when they did whisper of it, they gave it a name that revealed everything. Zli Grad, the evil city. At first glance, this might sound like patriotic myth-making, a page torn from the annals of Russia's national legend. But the truth is more complicated. Even Mongol sources admit what Kozelsk did. The resistance wasn't just remembered by its victims. It was acknowledged by its destroyers. Kozelsk earned its place in history, earned it in blood. Kozelsk marked a turning point in the campaign, the final major engagement of Batu's ruthless winter invasion of 1237 to 1238. For months, the Mongols had carved a bloody path across the principalities of Rus, moving with terrifying speed and coordination. But when Batu reached Kozelsk, everything changed. His army was spent. They had been on campaign through snow and mud for half a year. The siege of Torzhok had been a grinding affair that sapped morale and bled their numbers. Their plans to move on Novgorod, the crown jewel of the north, were scrapped entirely. Kozelsk wasn't supposed to be a challenge. It was small, provincial, insignificant on the map, but it refused to submit. And as the spring thaw came, Kozelsk transformed. The rivers swelled, the snows melted, and the town, perched between waterways, turned into a muddy fortress, nearly an island. Worse still for Batu, his subordinates Buri and Kadan had been cut off by the rising floodwaters. Without their support, every assault met stiff resistance. The people of Kozelsk didn't just defend, they struck back. They launched sorties. They torched siege engines. They pulled Mongol soldiers off ladders and walls and hacked them apart. They fought not with tactical brilliance, but with the fury of those who had already buried their dead. It wasn't strategy that defined Kozelsk. It was sheer human will. A will so fierce that Batu, the great-grandson of Genghis Khan, was driven to a rare emotion, rage. And it's that rage that immortalized the name Zli Grad. Kozelsk was a small fortress, said historian Vladimir Petrukin, but it greatly delayed the advance of the Mongols. Taking the city was no easy feat, yet leaving it behind was impossible, and this infuriated the invaders. In the ruthless logic of steppe warfare, no stone could be left unturned behind the lines. Any stronghold not subdued risked cutting off supply lines or striking at the rear. Kozelsk's stubborn defiance posed precisely that kind of threat. To this day, the memory of Kozelsk's stand has been immortalized in heraldic form. Its coat of arms, rich in symbolism, reflects both valor and sacrifice. A red field, soaked in blood. 5 silver shields with black crosses arranged in the form of a larger cross, speaking to the defenders' courage, their unity, and their doom. And 4 golden crosses standing for their steadfast loyalty, even in the face of annihilation. There was a yoke, that's obvious. An unbearable burden imposed on Russes, one whose weight would be felt for generations. But even in cities that surrendered swiftly or fell quickly, the Mongols showed little mercy. At Kozelsk, they merely encountered resistance equal to their own ferocity. And yet, modern voices have emerged questioning whether the Mongol invasion even happened, or whether its brutality has been exaggerated. To professional historians, such conspiracy theories are both baffling and offensive. The chronicles, the scars in the land, the archaeological evidence, and even Mongol sources themselves attest to the scale of the devastation. The horror was real. The pain was real. The reality was harsh and unmistakable. Worn down by the relentless slaughter and the unexpected resistance he encountered at Kozelsk, Batu Khan did something few could have predicted. He paused. The Mongol war machine, which had steamrolled through the principalities of Russes with terrifying efficiency, suddenly found itself mired in mud, blood, and defiance. Kozelsk had not just resisted. It had sapped the energy of his entire army. The spring thaw had turned the land into a quagmire. His men were exhausted, supplies were running low, and the psychological toll of losing thousands to a town that was supposed to fall in days, not weeks, had deeply shaken the confidence of his commanders. So Batu withdrew, retreating temporarily to the familiar steppes of the Polovtsian lands near the Don River. There, he allowed his men to regroup, bury their dead, and reckon with the reality that their campaign had nearly ground to a halt, not in front of a powerful capital, but at the gates of a small provincial town. For a general whose campaign had until then been marked by ruthless speed, it was a sobering moment. In the meantime, far to the west, a ripple of false hope spread across the battered lands of Rus. News of the Mongol withdrawal reached Kiev. Believing that the storm had passed and the worst was over, Yaroslav, the brother of the slain Prince Georgy, made his move. He departed from Kiev and journeyed to Vladimir, hoping to assume the mantle of Grand Prince in the wake of his brother's death and the retreat of Batu's forces. But he, like so many others, did not yet grasp the full magnitude of what the Mongols had unleashed. The withdrawal was not an end. It was an intermission. And yet, in that brief moment between devastation and the next blow, Kozelsk stood like a monument to resistance. Its defenders had no grand army, no foreign allies, no strategic wealth, and yet they held. For 7 long weeks, they defied the most feared army on earth. When the city finally fell, it was not due to cowardice or surrender, but because no one was left to fight. The heroic defense of Kozelsk remains etched in the historical memory of Rus, not just as a tale of bravery, but as a symbol of unyielding resolve in the face of overwhelming power. It showed that even in the darkest hour, the spirit of resistance could still burn bright, even if it burned to the ground with the town that carried it. If stories like this move you, give this video a like. It helps others discover the forgotten heroes of history. Want more deep dives into the moments that shaped nations? Hit subscribe and join us on the next journey through time. And tell us in the comments, do you think Kozelsk changed Batu Khan's plans more than we realize? Thanks for staying with us until the end.